The low hum of the mining rig's engines was my lullaby. Not the kind that brings peaceful dreams, but a grating dirge that somehow beats back the crushing silence of space. I twisted open a ration pack, the recycled protein mush sticking to my tongue like glue. Another day, another chunk of lifeless rock destined to fill some corporate fat cat's pockets on Earth. We weren't supposed to be out this far. It was an off-the-books run, a tip-off from a contact in low orbit, a whispered promise of a rare ore that could buy a man his own ship. Hell, it might even buy him a whole planet. That's the kind of talk that hooks you, especially out here. Makes a man forget that the void isn't picky about who it swallows. The first day, it was just the rig operator, Mitchell. Big guy, scarred face, not much for talk. "Think I got a winner," was all he said, hauling up another load. Not ore, chunks of some kind of blackened carapace. That was when the real work started, cutting those fragments loose with the plasma torch, my goggles glowing red hot as I traced the edges of some unnatural pattern. The thing was immense, buried beneath the rock like a monstrous fossil. But no fossil I'd ever seen in the company databases. The next morning, word reached the captain, a greedy bastard named Ellis, thin and weaselly. He came down to the pit himself, eyes glittering behind the glass of his environment suit. One glance, and it was like a fever took him. The rest of that day was a frenzy. Miners, engineers, me. We were all put to work clearing the debris, the usual routine abandoned. Ellis's voice announced over the comms, sharp and manic. "This is it, boys. This changes everything." He wouldn't shut up about what it could fetch, what kind of operation he could run if he had a fraction of the proceeds. We all kept working, but I could sense the unease spreading. Miners are a superstitious lot. We see the dark, the places where even the stars seem to fall away. It took another day to reveal it fully. A massive, segmented ovoid, its surface strangely smooth, like aged bone. One of the miners, young kid named Torres, retched the minute he laid eyes on it. Ellis practically danced with excitement, ordering Torres off and barking something about weak stomachs. That night, over the recycled air and synthesized rations, I heard the whispers. "What the hell do you think that is, man?" That was Carter, the rig mechanic, voice low. "Something ain't meant for human eyes is what?" Johnson drawled, his accent thick as the asteroid belt itself. I wasn't one for the supernatural, but the pit had a wrongness to it that even a dim bulb like Ellis couldn't ignore. I think that's what decided him. The thing was too damn big to haul up with our equipment. He started spouting orders. We were to sever the egg thing, whatever it was, and bring it aboard. My stomach twisted. I'm an engineer, not a butcher. But who argues with a captain gone mad with star gold fever? Ellis's orders crackled over the comms, and a chill that had nothing to do with the vacuum seeped into my bones. We'd never cut into anything uncharted in the depths of space. You just didn't. Something about that felt blasphemous, like hacking at the bones of the universe itself. But then again, the allure of easy credits had a way of numbing a man's sense, and none of us were saints. Morning came and we descended into the pit like pallbearers. The plasma torches hissed with blinding light as Carter and I laid into the segmented shell. Hours bled into each other. The shifts were brutal, the men grim-faced and sweat-slicked within their bulky suits. Ellis was practically vibrating with impatience, lurking at the pit's edge and ordering us to work faster. He reminded me of a vulture hovering over carrion. The torches weren't cutting clean. It was like the surface was shifting, rippling beneath the focused heat. I heard Johnson shout, "What the hell is that?" My own stomach lurched as I peered closer. There was a darkness seeping through, spreading like an obscene stain over the bone-pale surface of the egg. At that moment, the entire structure shook, a slow heave beneath our feet. Torres screamed, a high-pitched, terrified noise that cut through the comms. The plasma torch danced wildly in his grip as something erupted from within the egg. It rose in a gush of viscous fluid and shattered fragments, a nightmare of limbs and unnatural flesh. Instead of legs, it surged forward on thick columns like an immense, many-legged slug. Where a head should have been, 3 bulbous masses lolled on fleshy stems with a network of exposed veins. It lacked eyes, nose, or mouth, yet a wordless scream tore across, not human but carrying within it an utterly alien kind of anguish and fury. Chaos reigned. The men scattered, stumbling back like ants when their nest is overturned. One moment Carter was beside me, and the next he was gone, enveloped by one of the columns and dragged toward the dripping jaws of head-like protrusions. The lights on his suit dimmed, then winked out as the creature began its gruesome feast. Instinct took over. We ran. I wasn't sure where, just away from that pit and the thing, now towering over it. The rig. That was the plan. Get to the rig, fire up the engines, and get the hell out of this nightmare. Behind us, the pit was filled with a sound only madness could conjure. The snapping of bone, wet, slurping noises, and the static-laced screech that sent shivers down my spine. We didn't look back. I didn't. Johnson was the first to reach the rig. He pounded on the hatch controls, screaming for them to open. Then, he was gone. One of the creature's columns snaked out from the gloom, encircling his torso and pulling him back toward the horror waiting in the pit. I reached the rig next, my fingers fumbling on the controls. "Open the damn hatch! Open up!" My voice was raw, the plea of a man who knew his end was slithering closer. And then the intercom buzzed. It was Ellis. His voice wasn't frantic, not anymore. It had taken on a new tone, one laced with morbid calculation. "Negative," he pronounced, each syllable clipped and cold. "You are taking your chances with the creature. You can negotiate. That's an order." For the first time, I understood. The ship, the crew, they were all expendable to the captain. My life, worth less than the potential bartering chip that slithered in the pit. We were locked out, betrayed, left to whatever fate that newly hatched monstrosity decided for us. My mind fractured under the pressure. Ellis, that conniving bastard, had sealed us out, condemning us to the thing in the pit. "Johnson!" My voice scraped raw as it tore through the comm. "Johnson, can you hear me?" Only static answered, interrupted by the obscene slurping and gnashing emanating from the pit. Bile rose in my throat, a bitter counterpoint to the stale air recycled through my suit. Torres, a young kid fresh out of mining school, had devolved into a whimpering mess on the floor. I couldn't fault him. We all felt the crushing weight of despair, the suffocating knowledge that our options had narrowed to a horrifying menu of bad choices. That's when it snagged my eye. A forgotten emergency escape pod nestled against the rig's hull, a rusty testament to the company's cutthroat cost-cutting measures. It was a one-man coffin at best, with life support barely ticking past bare minimum. But compared to facing that abomination, it felt like a luxury suite. "There!" I barked, desperation lending a hysterical edge to my voice. "The escape pod! We use that to get the hell off this rock!" Torres looked up, face streaked with grime and fear. "And go where? We'll just be space dust in a tin can." His logic held the weight of a collapsing asteroid. Drifting in a glorified sardine can was hardly a vacation plan, but it was a chance. Here, staring down the gullet of that horror, we had none. "We send a distress beacon," I said, the plan forming with clarity. "Anything to attract a passing ship, a space station, anyone. We only needed to reach a shipping lane, some inhabited asteroid, anything that wasn't this death trap." The next hour transformed into a frantic ballet of survival. I tore into the ancient maintenance panel, my tools sparking against rusted metal. My goal? Bypass the rig's systems and jumpstart the emergency beacon. It was a gamble, and the clock ticked ominously. Every wet, slurping sound from the pit was a stark reminder that the creature would be looking for seconds soon enough. Movement caught my eye. Torres stood behind me, holding his plasma torch, the very one he dropped in a moment of terror. Shame flushed through me. The kid wasn't a coward, just scared. Sometimes all you needed was a reason to fight back. "Here," I said, a rough edge to my voice, and squeezed his shoulder in a display of camaraderie. "Let's get to work, kid." We worked like men possessed, sweat stinging our eyes as we wrestled with the brittle wires. The pit loomed, reminding of the horror lurking within. Each gurgle from the creature sent shivers down my spine, fueling our frantic dance. Finally, a spark. The emergency beacon coughed to life. Relief washed over me, a fleeting wave before the cruel reality returned. Only one of us could reach the pod. Someone had to buy the other precious moments, to lure the creature away, to become bait. The weight of that decision settled on my chest like a ton of ore. My survival instinct screamed with the intensity of a reactor overload. There was only one pod, and we both knew it. Our gazes locked, and time seemed to stretch, distorting around us like space near a dying star. Torres was young, barely out of his teens. I was old, grizzled, my best years chewed up and spat out by this unforgiving void. But that kid, he had a whole life ahead of him, if we could just get him off this godforsaken rock. The decision hung heavy, a boulder crushing my soul. "I'll buy you time," I said. His eyes widened in protest. "No, we find another way. There's got to be another—" "Kid," I snapped, the harshness jolting him. "I've been out here longer than you've been alive. There ain't another way." We both knew it was a death sentence for me. A gamble that the creature wouldn't turn its attention before he could scramble into the pod and activate the launch sequence. Torres moved toward the pod, a slow, shuffling motion driven more by despair than any conviction. My eyes were glued to the pit, heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst free of my chest. The rasping sounds hadn't stopped. The creature was still busy, but for how long? "Just get in the damn thing," I muttered through the comm, the tremble in my voice revealing the fear I tried to mask. The hatch slid open with a rusty groan, revealing the cramped interior. Torres hesitated, glancing back. "Go!" The word ripped from my throat. It was the last boost he needed. Torres threw himself inside, the hatch slamming shut with a resounding thud that punched me in the gut. Immediately, I turned and ran, not toward the rig, but deeper into the pit. Every step was agony, a slow descent into a monstrous mouth. My torchlight bobbed and danced, revealing fragments of the discarded shell, slimy and obscene in the half-light. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. One of the creature's columns surged toward me, its bulbous head forms bobbing obscenely. I raised my torch, flames flaring. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, to flee. Yet, with a calmness I didn't know I possessed, I stood my ground. The beast recoiled slightly, the heat blistering its exposed flesh. In that split second I saw it, not blind as we'd initially thought, but sensitive to light. This was my chance. "Here, you ugly bastard! Come on, let's dance!" As the creature moved in, I ignited my suit's reserve fuel tank, sending a burst of blinding fire arcing toward the mass. A shriek, not human, but primal and agonized, filled the air. The columns writhed and bucked, some catching fire, the stench of burning flesh joining the cacophony. I knew it wouldn't kill the thing, but it bought some time. Through the flames and smoke, I heard it, the rumble of the pod's engines igniting, growing louder with painful slowness. I risked a glance back. The pod was rising, a speck of light ascending against the uncaring stars. Torres made it. My laughter bordered on the edge of hysteria. It bounced off the walls of the pit, mingling with the creature's pained shriek and the receding sound of the escape pod's engines. I was buying the kid time, giving him a chance to flee, but my own fate was sealed. A wave of nausea swept through me. Not fear exactly, but resignation. I knew how this would end, a bloody smear on the rock, devoured by some nightmare from the darkest corner of the cosmos. Funny, all those years out here, I never once imagined my ending would be quite this exotic. The creature was recovering. The flames on its columns were subsiding, and the exposed heads were bobbing, searching for their tormentor. I couldn't delay any longer. Gripping the torch like a weapon, I plunged deeper into the pit. This was it, my final charge. Suddenly the air filled with another sound, a familiar whine, muffled by the ground beneath, but getting louder with each passing second. Not the pods, not a rescue vessel. The damn ship. From the corner of my eye I saw movement, the hatch doors to the mining rig opening wide. That slimy bastard Ellis was cutting and running. He'd found a smaller escape vessel stashed away, some hidden bolt hole meant for his cowardly hide, and now he was abandoning us to our gruesome fate. Rage surged through me, hot and overwhelming. After everything, he wasn't even going to risk attempting a rescue. Self-preservation trumped all, even the faintest notion of loyalty or camaraderie. But in a twisted way, I was almost grateful. My decision was now forced. There was nothing left for me here. I raised the comm to my lips, the static crackle deafening in the sudden stillness. "Torres!" I choked out, my voice raw. "Tell them. Tell anyone who'll listen. Tell them about this rock. What's down here?" I didn't expect a reply. There was no time. The creature was coming, a mass of fury bathed in the glow of my waning torch. I raised the torch high, fuel spurting in a blistering stream of fire, aimed at the heart of the beast. "Come get some, you ugly son of a—" And with that I charged. My vision exploded in a burst of white, and then there was only darkness. Pain, yes, but strangely fleeting. And in those final moments, an odd sense of calm. Torres was safe, the warning sent. Maybe the void would keep its secret a little longer. Pain. A relentless landlord demanding rent from every bone in my body was my first tenet of consciousness. It pounded a relentless rhythm against my skull, crawled under my skin like a swarm of fire ants. I tried to scream, to thrash against the agony, but a choked groan escaped my lips instead. Blearily, I forced my eyes open. The world came back into view, a blurry mess of rock and the distant, indifferent glimmer of stars. Somehow, incomprehensibly, I was still alive. The creature loomed above, a writhing nightmare against the faint light. Its bulbous headforms, now blistered and charred thanks to my gamble, bobbed as it assessed me. One of the fleshy columns twitched, sending a searing bolt of pain lancing through my side. It hadn't finished with me yet. I'd fought, sacrificed, all for nothing. My fingers dug into the unforgiving rock, searching for a weapon, any weapon, but there was nothing. Just the cold embrace of the asteroid and a monster poised to extinguish the embers of my life. Then, the ground lurched beneath me. A violent tremor, a shudder that ripped through the rock face, sent shockwaves radiating outwards. The creature shrieked, its attention ripped away from me with horrifying suddenness. It recoiled as the earth itself seemed to crack and buckle, spewing dust and shattered rock. A primal terror gripped me. Was this the end? Some geological backlash from the chaos we'd unleashed? But then I saw it. Rising from the depths of the pit was a behemoth that dwarfed the first. Its form resembled the smaller one, but inflated to unimaginable proportions. This was no mere hatchling. This was a queen, a matriarch, or whatever such a role translated to in this alien hierarchy of nightmares. The smaller creature, a gnat buzzing beside a hurricane, trembled. Its shrieks faded to whimpers as if the mere presence of the other silenced its fury. The great behemoth made no move to attack or harm the smaller creature. Instead, one of its massive columns, as thick as a skyscraper, snaked outward, not towards me, but towards the escaping ship of Ellis. Ellis, the conniving coward, was still out there, maneuvering the ship in a bid for escape. But against this thing, the rickety mining vessel was a fly trapped in a spider's web. The column surged across the empty distance with deceptive speed, wrapping around the mining ship with ease. Ellis's frantic shouts, the panicked screams of the crew, pierced the oppressive silence. The ship's engines whined in protest, their efforts straining but futile. A cold dread seeped into my bones. This wasn't mercy. This was a predator toying with its prey. The behemoth hoisted the mining ship high, its engines sputtering uselessly against the immense force. And then, with a lurch, the creature began dragging the ship back towards the pit. My eyes were glued to the scene unfolding before me, my battered body strangely numb in the face of the horror. The monstrous matriarch, dwarfing the ship, held the vessel aloft like a trophy. The muffled screams emanating from within were a chilling soundtrack for this macabre display of power. With ease, the beast brought the ship down to earth, not with a crash, but with a calculated, almost gentle movement. It was like a predator testing its prey's defenses, not yet ready to deliver the killing blow. A cruel game before the inevitable slaughter. Then, it moved. With a speed that belied its gargantuan size, one of its fleshy columns wrapped around the midsection of the ship. The metal groaned and buckled, a discordant shriek against the unnatural silence. For a moment, the ship held, the columns straining like some enormous vine trying to strangle its victim. Then, the metal gave way. With a deafening rending of steel, the ship was torn in half. Exposed wiring sparked, fuel tanks hissed, and the screams abruptly died away in choked, gasping silence. The front section of the ship, crumpled and mangled, was unceremoniously cast aside by the creature. Its attention focused solely on the remaining half, the section containing the cockpit and what was left of the crew quarters. A low, rumbling sound emanated from the beast, a vibration that penetrated my very bones. It was not a cry, but it held a chilling undertone of anticipation, almost satisfaction. And then it reached in. One of the massive columns smashed through the fractured remains of the cockpit, shattering the viewing port in an explosion of shards. The column probed the wreckage, slithering and searching, moving with the grace of a snake through a rabbit hole. Moments later, it emerged, something wriggling feebly in its grasp. Ellis. The bastard was still alive, at least for now, his uniform torn and streaked with blood. He kicked and grasped, but his struggles were futile against the creature's relentless grip. I watched, paralysis gripping me. This was it. The end for Ellis, and likely soon after, for me as well. There was a brutal justice to it. His greed, his betrayal of his crew, had led him straight to this end. The matriarch lifted Ellis, his shrieks fading into whimpers of abject terror. It brought him closer to the waiting mouth of the smaller creature, filled with obscene eagerness. The head forms bobbed obscenely, dripping with a viscous fluid that I knew all too well. There was no escape for Ellis, no last-ditch maneuver, no miracle that would see him cheat his fate. In a gruesome parody of a mother feeding her child, the matriarch lowered him into the writhing mass of the hatchling. The sounds that followed were not human. They were the sounds of a man being consumed alive. The sounds of bones breaking, flesh tearing, screams gargling and fading into a sickening silence. I turned my head away, bile rising in my throat. But the sounds, the images, they were seared into my memory. When the screaming finally stopped, a dreadful silence stood. The sounds of the mangled ship, the faint hiss of escaping oxygen seemed deafening in the stillness. I lay broken, my body a tortured landscape, but my mind raced. Why? Why had the creatures spared me? Was this some sick game, a stay of execution before whatever gruesome fate they had planned next? As the agonizing thrum of adrenaline subsided, I realized the monstrous pair were retreating. The matriarch, massive and imposing, descended back into the pit, the writhing mass of the hatchling following its broodmother like a reflection. They vanished into the depths with methodical precision, as if their outburst of violence had been nothing more than a calculated hunt, and now their appetites were sated. For a time I simply lay there, muscles twitching. With great effort, I turned my head. The shattered remnants of the ship glinted in the distant starlight, a monument to our hubris. Something shifted in the wreckage, drawing my attention. Could that be? With a surge of will I didn't know I possessed, I struggled to my feet. Pain lanced through my battered body, each movement a battle against exhaustion and injury. Yet driven by a primal urge, I forced myself to stumble toward the ship. As I neared, figures emerged from the wreckage survivors. They wore the bulky environment suits, the only things that could have offered limited protection from the sudden decompression of the hull breach. They were injured, battered, and stumbled with the exhaustion of those who had been through hell and back. But they were alive. "Over here, damn it, I need help!" I shouted, the words catching in my parched throat. One of the figures turned, startled, then broke into a run. It was Henderson, one of the engineers, tears streaming from behind the visor of his cracked helmet. With his help and that of those who followed, I was pulled into the relative safety of what was left of the ship. For a long while, there was only silence broken by the sobbing of the survivors and the groans of the wounded. We huddled amidst the twisted wreckage, sharing what remained of our meager supplies, the knowledge of what lurked beneath the surface, slithering into our minds like a poison. The passing hours became a nightmare of slow suffocation. Each breath seemed to suck a little more life from the dwindling oxygen reserves. There was no food, no water, only the numbing throb of injuries and the oppressive knowledge that our borrowed time was running out. We drifted between fitful bouts of delirious sleep and the stark reality of our situation. There would be no last-minute reprieve, no daring escape to romanticize the ordeal. In this unforgiving corner of the universe, we were destined to die slow, agonizing deaths, entombed in the wreckage of our own aspirations. Each time we woke, the darkness pressed a little closer. The breaths of the survivors grew fainter, their movements sluggish. We were becoming ghosts, fading traces on the cold wind that seeped through the shattered hull. And then, movement in the distance. It was barely perceptible at first, a mere anomaly against the barren landscape. Someone gasped, and a current of something like anticipation rippled through our broken group. "Ship," I managed to croak, the word feeling foreign in my dry throat. "It's a ship." The silhouette grew larger, steadily approaching across the blasted wasteland. It wasn't a corporate cruiser, but something bulkier, more formidable. Not a rescue party, but a substantial mining vessel, weathered and armed with the kind of firepower that spoke of treacherous territories and hard-learned lessons. Henderson let out a sigh. "Doesn't matter if it's pirates or angels. We're dead if they don't get here soon enough." As the ship drew closer, I squinted against the sting of the ever-present dust. There was something odd, a flash of color that didn't belong. And then my breath caught in my throat. It was the battered pod, barely recognizable, lashed to the side of the larger ship like a dinghy clinging to a battleship. Torres had made it out, and he had returned with reinforcements. When the ship landed, the hiss of the pressure doors releasing was music to my ears. The faces that greeted us from beneath their visors were grimy, bearded, hardened men forged in the same ruthless crucible as ourselves. But their eyes held something beyond the usual greed or suspicion. There was a hint of respect, a silent acknowledgement of the ordeal we had endured. Torres, a boy no longer, pushed his way to the front. As his gaze met mine, relief swept across his features. "You held out," he said, his voice filled with awe and unspoken gratitude. I told them everything." Later, safely aboard their vessel, hot food in our stomachs and the promise of medical attention soothing our battered bodies, I watched the asteroid fade into the distance. Torres had kept his word. They listened, the warnings about something lurking beneath the surface heeded with the wary pragmatism of those who understand the capricious cruelty of space. Years turn to dust in the unforgiving expanse of space. They scar and shape a man, etch themselves into the lines of a face, into the haunted depths of eyes that have looked into the abyss and come back changed. The asteroid became a whispered legend, a grim tale swapped over stale drinks in spaceport bars. A dark reminder that some corners of the void are better left undisturbed, that some hungers are better left unsated. The company sealed all records, a web of calculated lies and half-truths spun to protect their profit margins. We, the survivors, became scattered remnants, marked forever by our brush with the unfathomable. Henderson used his share of the hazard pay to buy a broken-down freighter. He hauls cargo now, sticking to well-traveled routes, keeping his head down and his pistol close. They say he's become jittery, that every creak of his aging ship makes him jump, and that he sometimes wakes screaming from nightmares, too terrible to voice aloud. I would not be surprised. Young Torres, well, he is not so young anymore. He rose through the ranks, driven by the memory of what he witnessed and the lives it claimed. He captains his own mining vessel now, a lean machine armed to the teeth and always stocked with extra oxygen tanks, just in case. His crew are a hardened lot, hand-picked and loyal, veterans of the dark spaces. They seek profit, yes, but they also seek answers. Whispers linger of expeditions he leads to the very fringes of charted space, of long weeks spent surveying barren worlds, as if searching for something beyond mere wealth. As for me, I found myself adrift. Haunted by injuries and shadows of what might have been, I drifted between temporary contracts, a ghost flitting amongst the stations of the outer ring. My hands are steady enough, and space offers a perverse kind of anonymity, a way to hide amidst the vastness. And sometimes I dream. Not nightmares like Henderson experiences, but something far stranger. I dream of the matriarch, its bulk and bobbing head forms no longer inspiring terror, but an odd sense of kinship. I see myself standing before the yawning gulf of the pit, not as prey, but as a silent observer. These dreams always leave me with a chilling clarity, a sense that some games have rules even gods and monsters play by, and that our survival was not mere chance, but a calculated move on a cosmic board. Such thoughts offer little solace. In the end, the void claims us all, one way or another. Whether we vanish in a flash of hunger or simply fade from existence, a lone speck destined to meet the endless expanse matters little. We survived when so many others did not. And for that victory, we pay a price each starlit night.